classroom door swung open on a crisp September morning, and 8-year-old Mara Jenkins stepped inside with her backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. Her dark hair hung in 2 careful braids, and her uniform was pressed and neat, but there was something about the way she moved that made Miss Rebecca Dalton pause mid-sentence. The girl's eyes swept the room with a wariness that seemed far too old for someone who should have been excited about 3rd grade. "Good morning, Mara," Miss Dalton said warmly, gesturing toward an empty desk near the window. "You can take that seat right there, sweetie. We're just getting started with morning announcements." Mara nodded but didn't move toward the desk. Instead, she stood frozen just inside the doorway, her knuckles white against the straps of her backpack. The other children were settling into their seats, pulling out notebooks and pencils, chattering about their weekends. Nobody seemed to notice the new girl standing there, utterly still, as if she'd been turned to stone. Miss Dalton walked over, crouching down to meet Mara's eyes. "Is everything okay? Would you like help finding your supplies?" "I'm okay," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. She took a few steps toward the desk, then stopped again, her gaze fixed on the blue plastic chair. "Go ahead and have a seat," Miss Dalton encouraged gently. "We're about to start our reading lesson." Mara approached the desk with the kind of caution someone might use near a sleeping dog they weren't sure about. She set her backpack on the floor, pulled the chair out slightly, and then just stood there, staring down at it. Her hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the desk. Miss Dalton straightened up, puzzled but not wanting to push too hard on the first day. "Take your time, honey, whenever you're ready." But Mara didn't sit. She stood beside the desk, shifting her weight from foot to foot, while Miss Dalton began the morning routine. The Pledge of Allegiance was recited, announcements were made over the intercom about the upcoming book fair, and still, Mara remained standing. A few students started to notice, nudging each other and whispering. "Why isn't she sitting down?" asked Tommy Chen from the back row. "Maybe she has ants in her pants," giggled Sarah Martinez. Miss Dalton shot them a look that said enough, but she was beginning to wonder herself. She'd taught 3rd grade for 12 years and had seen all manner of first-day jitters. Some kids cried, some clung to their parents in the hallway, some refused to speak. But she'd never seen a child so clearly terrified of a simple classroom chair. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. By lunchtime, Mara had been standing for nearly 4 hours. Her legs must have been aching, Miss Dalton thought, watching the girl sway slightly as she tried to write in her workbook while standing. During math lesson, Miss Dalton had suggested Mara might be more comfortable sitting, and the girl had actually tried. She'd positioned herself over the chair, lowering herself slowly. But the moment her body made contact with the seat, she'd gasped sharply and shot back up, as if the plastic had burned her. The sound she made was raw and frightened, and it had silenced the entire classroom for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Mara, sweetheart, are you hurt?" Miss Dalton had asked, moving quickly to her side. "No, ma'am," Mara had said quickly, her eyes filling with tears she clearly refused to let fall. "I'm fine, I like standing better." But she wasn't fine, that much was obvious. When the lunch bell rang and the children lined up to go to the cafeteria, Mara walked with a stiffness that suggested every step hurt. In the cafeteria, she stood at the end of the table while her classmates sat on the long benches, eating her sandwich in small, careful bites. Ms. Dalton watched from the teacher's table, exchanging concerned glances with the school counselor, Mrs. Patricia Hunt. "New student?" Mrs. Hunt asked, following Ms. Dalton's gaze. "Started today, Mara Jenkins. She won't sit down. Every time she tries, she looks like she's in pain." Mrs. Hunt frowned, setting down her coffee cup. Physical or psychological, you think? I don't know, but something's very wrong. That afternoon, during silent reading time, the incident that would later haunt Miss Dalton's dreams occurred. The children were scattered around the room with their books, some sitting on the carpet, others at their desks. Mara had found a corner by the bookshelf where she could stand and lean slightly against the wall. She was reading quietly, seemingly absorbed in her book, when another student walked past her to return a book to the shelf. The movement was completely innocent, just a boy trying to navigate the crowded classroom, but his backpack brushed against Mara's lower back as he passed. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Mara's book clattered to the floor, her whole body went rigid, and then she began to shake, violent tremors that ran from her shoulders down to her knees. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a silent scream of agony that was somehow worse than if she'd actually cried out. Miss Dalton was at her side in seconds. "Mara, Mara, look at me. What's wrong? What hurts?" But Mara couldn't speak. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against the wall as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. The other children had gone completely silent, staring with wide eyes at their classmates' breakdown. "Everyone, eyes on your books," Miss Dalton commanded, her voice firm despite the panic rising in her chest. She turned to the most responsible student in the class. "Emma, run to the office and ask them to send Nurse Williams. Tell her it's urgent." Emma took off at a run. Miss Dalton knelt beside Mara, careful not to touch her. "Honey, I need you to breathe for me. Can you do that? In through your nose, out through your mouth." It took several minutes, but gradually Mara's shaking subsided to just trembling. The tears continued to fall silently, and when she finally looked at Miss Dalton, the fear in those young eyes was profound and deeply unsettling. "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make a scene." "You have nothing to apologize for," Missy Dalton assured her. "But sweetheart, you need to tell me what's wrong. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine, Mara. That's okay. We all need help sometimes, but I can't help you if you don't tell me what's going on." Mara's lips pressed together in a thin line, and she shook her head slowly. "I can't. I just can't." Nurse Williams arrived, slightly out of breath from hurrying down the hallway. She was a kind woman in her 50s, with gentle hands and an arsenal of patience, developed from decades of working with frightened children. She took one look at Mara's tear-stained face and trembling frame, and made an immediate decision. "Let's go to my office where it's quiet," she said softly. "Miss Dalton, can you spare her for a bit?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." Mara followed Nurse Williams out of the classroom, walking with that same painful stiffness Miss Dalton had noticed earlier. As soon as the door closed behind them, the classroom erupted in whispers. "What's wrong with her? Did you see how she was shaking? Maybe she's sick. My cousin has seizures sometimes. Maybe it's that." Miss Dalton held up her hand for silence. "That's enough. Mara is going through something difficult, and the best thing we can do as her classmates is be kind and patient. Now, let's get back to our reading. We have 20 minutes left." But she couldn't focus on the lesson plan. Her mind was in the nurse's office, wondering what Nurse Williams was discovering, wondering what could make a child so afraid of something as simple as sitting down. The possibilities running through her head were all dark, and she found herself watching the clock, counting the minutes until she could check on Mara. In the nurse's office, Mara sat perched on the edge of the examination table, her feet dangling above the floor. Nurse Williams noticed immediately that the girl wasn't actually sitting. Not really. She was balancing on the very edge, keeping most of her weight on her legs rather than settling onto the padded table. "Mara, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be honest with me. Nurse Williams began, pulling up a rolling stool to sit across from her. "Can you do that?" Mara nodded, but her expression was guarded. "Have you been feeling sick? Stomach ache? Headache? Anything like that?" "No, ma'am." "Did something happen this morning before school? Did you fall or hurt yourself somehow?" A pause. Then, "No." "Mara." Nurse Williams leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "I saw how you reacted when that boy's backpack touched you. That wasn't just surprise, that was pain. Real serious pain. I need to know where you're hurting so I can help you." Mara's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Nurse Williams. Her small hands twisted together in her lap, and for a moment it looked like she might actually speak. Then her face closed off completely, like shutters being pulled down over windows. "I'm okay," she said, and this time there was something almost rehearsed about it. "Really, I just got scared. That's all." Nurse Williams had been doing this job long enough to recognize a lie when she heard one, especially one a child had clearly been taught to tell. "Honey, I'm going to need to do a quick check, just to make sure everything is okay." "Is that all right?" Panic flashed across Mara's face. "No, no, please, I'm fine. I promise I'm fine. I just want to check your back where you seem to be hurting." "No." The word came out sharp and desperate. Mara actually scooted backward on the table, despite the obvious pain it caused her. "You can't. Please, I'm okay. I'll be better. I'll sit down in class, I promise. Just please don't." The desperation in her voice made Nurse Williams' stomach turn. In 30 years of school nursing, she'd seen her share of concerning situations, and every instinct she'd honed over those decades was screaming at her now. This child was terrified, and it wasn't just fear of a medical examination. This was the fear of consequences, of something much bigger than a trip to the nurse's office. "Okay," Nurse Williams said softly, not wanting to push so hard that she lost the girl's trust entirely. "I won't examine you right now, but Mara, if you're hurting, if someone has hurt you, you need to tell an adult. That's what we're here for, to keep you safe." "I am safe," Mara whispered, but her eyes said something entirely different. Nurse Williams let her return to class, but immediately afterward she knocked on Principal Morrison's door. Within 15 minutes, they'd pulled Mara's file and were making phone calls. Her emergency contact was listed as her mother, Diana Jenkins. The father wasn't mentioned anywhere in the paperwork. Diana worked as a waitress at a diner across town, according to the registration form. When Principal Morrison reached her by phone, the conversation was brief and unsettling. "This is Principal Morrison from Riverside Elementary. I'm calling about your daughter, Mara." "Is she in trouble already?" Diana's voice was sharp, annoyed. "I told her to behave herself." "No, she's not in trouble. We're concerned because she seems to be in physical discomfort. She's refusing to sit down, and when she's touched, she appears to be in significant pain. We'd like to recommend she be evaluated by a doctor." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "She's fine. Mara's always been dramatic. She gets that from her father's side. Mrs. Jenkins, with all due respect, what we're observing goes beyond typical childhood behavior. Our nurse believes she may have an injury that needs medical attention. I said she's fine." Diana's tone had shifted from annoyed to hostile. She probably just wants attention. New school, new kids, you know how they get. "She'll sit down when she's ready. Is there anything else?" Principal Morrison exchanged a look with Nurse Williams, who was listening on speaker. "We may need to follow up on this. If Mara continues to show signs of distress, we are obligated to ensure her well-being. You do what you need to do." Diana's voice was cold now. "But you're wasting your time. There's nothing wrong with my daughter that a little discipline won't fix. Now I need to get back to work." The line went dead. Principal Morrison slowly set down the phone and looked at Nurse Williams. That, she said quietly, was not the response of a concerned parent. No, it wasn't. Nurse Williams felt the familiar weight of suspicion settling in her chest. I think we need to document everything carefully. And I want to keep a very close eye on Mara. The rest of that first week followed a disturbing pattern. Each morning, Mara would arrive at school, walking stiffly, as if every movement hurt. She would stand through every lesson, through lunch, through afternoon activities. By the end of each day, exhaustion was evident in every line of her small body. Her face would go pale, dark circles would appear under her eyes, and sometimes she would sway on her feet. Miss Dalton tried everything she could think of. She brought in a stability ball, thinking maybe Mara would find it less threatening than a chair. Mara had stared at it with obvious longing, but shook her head. She offered cushions, suggesting maybe the hard plastic was uncomfortable. Mara politely declined. She even asked if Mara would like to sit on the carpet during story time, like some of the other children did. "I'm okay standing," Mara had said, and by now it had become her mantra. "I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm okay." But she wasn't okay, and it was becoming more obvious with each passing day. On Thursday morning, during the weekly school assembly, the entire elementary school gathered in the gymnasium. The principal was giving announcements about the upcoming fall festival, and the students were expected to sit quietly on the floor in neat rows, organized by grade. Ms. Dalton watched Mara position herself at the end of her class's row, kneeling instead of sitting. It was a compromise the girl had apparently worked out for herself, though even kneeling seemed to cause her discomfort. The assembly dragged on. 10 minutes became 20, then 30. The principal introduced the PTA president, who gave a long speech about volunteer opportunities. Then the music teacher came up to discuss the upcoming winter concert auditions. 40 minutes in, Ms. Dalton noticed Mara swaying. The girl's face had gone from pale to nearly gray, and she was gripping her own knees so hard her knuckles had turned white. Ms. Dalton started to stand, to go to her, but before she could take a step, Mara's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed sideways onto the gymnasium floor. The assembly descended into chaos. Children gasped and some screamed. Teachers rushed forward. Principal Morrison was calling for Nurse Williams over the microphone. Ms. Dalton reached Mara first, dropping to her knees beside the unconscious child. "Mara? Mara, can you hear me?" She checked for breathing and pulse, both present, thank God. "Someone get me a pillow. And clear some space." Nurse Williams arrived with her medical kit, shouldering through the crowd of concerned teachers and frightened students. She did a quick assessment, checking Mara's vital signs, looking for any obvious injuries from the fall. Pulse is elevated. She's breathing. "Mara? Mara, honey, can you open your eyes?" After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Mara's eyelids fluttered. She made a small, confused sound, then seemed to remember where she was. Panic filled her eyes. "You fainted," Nurse Williams explained calmly. "Just stay still for a minute. You hit your head a little when you fell, but I think you're okay." "I need to stand up," Mara said, trying to push herself upright. "Absolutely not. You just lost consciousness. You're going to lie here for a few minutes while I make sure you're all right." "Please," tears were forming in Mara's eyes again. "Please, I need to stand up. I can't lie on my back, please." There was such raw terror in her voice that Nurse Williams hesitated. "All right, but we're going to do this very slowly, and you're going to lean on me. Understood?" With help, they got Mara into a sitting position, though the girl immediately shifted to support herself, mostly on her legs rather than actually sitting. Her breathing was coming in short, panicked gasps. "Ms. Dalton, can you help me get her to my office?" Nurse Williams asked. And Principal Morrison, we should probably dismiss the students back to their classrooms. They managed to get Mara to the nurse's office, where she refused to lie down on the examination bed despite being obviously exhausted. Instead, she stood leaning against the wall, trembling from fatigue and something else, something deeper. Mara, you collapsed because you've been standing for hours every day, Nurse Williams said firmly. Your body can't sustain that. You're 8 years old. You need to sit. You need to rest. And you need to tell us why you can't. I told you, I'm fine. You just fainted in front of 200 people. That is not fine. Miss Dalton knelt down to be at eye level with Mara. Sweetheart, we know something is hurting you. We can see it, and we want to help. But we can't do that if you won't let us. Please, whatever it is, we can handle it together. For a long moment, Mara just stared at her with those haunted eyes. Her lip trembled. Her hands were shaking. And then, in a voice so small it was barely audible, she whispered, "Will he get in trouble?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Miss Dalton and Nurse Williams exchanged a quick, significant look. He, not she, not they. He. "Who are you worried about, honey?" Miss Dalton asked gently. But the moment had passed. Mara's face closed off again, and she shook her head. "Nobody. I didn't mean anything. Can I go back to class now?" "I think you should rest here for a while," Nurse Williams said. "And Mara, we need to call your mother. You fainted. She needs to know." Fresh panic bloomed on Mara's face. "No. Please don't call her. She's working. She'll be so mad if you bother her at work. Please, I'm fine now. I won't faint again. I promise." But protocol was protocol, and a child losing consciousness required parental notification. This time, when Principal Morrison called, Diana Jenkins's response was even more hostile than before. "What now?" "Mrs. Jenkins, Mara fainted during assembly this morning. We're keeping her in the nurse's office for observation, but we wanted you to be aware." "Of course she did." Diana's voice was laced with contempt. "I told you she was being dramatic. She's probably loving all this attention." Principal Morrison felt her jaw tighten. "Mrs. Jenkins, your daughter lost consciousness. This is serious. We strongly recommend you take her to be evaluated by a physician." "I'm not leaving work for this. She's fine. Just give her some water and send her back to class." "With all due respect, I don't think you understand the severity." "With all due respect," Diana cut her off, "I know my own daughter. She's playing you all. If she wants to stand all day, let her stand. If she wants to faint for attention, let her faint. But don't call me at work again unless she's actually dying." The call ended abruptly. Principal Morrison stood there with the phone in her hand, fury and concern warring in her expression. She looked at Nurse Williams and Miss Dalton, who had heard every word through the speaker. "That woman," Miss Dalton said, her voice shaking with anger, "is hiding something. Or she knows exactly what's causing Mara's behavior and doesn't want us to find out," Nurse Williams added grimly. Principal Morrison nodded slowly. "I'm going to make some calls, quietly, because if my instincts are right, we're looking at a situation that goes far beyond a reluctant student." The following Monday brought with it a cold rain that drummed against the classroom windows and turned the playground into a muddy mess. The children were restless from being cooped up inside during recess, their energy bouncing off the walls like electricity. Miss Dalton was trying to organize them for an art project, handing out construction paper and glue sticks when she noticed Mara standing in her usual spot by her desk. But something was different today. The girl looked worse. Her face was drawn and pale, with deep shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept in days. She was gripping the edge of her desk so tightly that her fingers had gone white, and she was swaying slightly, as if even standing had become too much. "All right, class," Ms. Dalton announced. Today we're going to create fall collages. You'll need to sit at your desks because we're working with glue and small pieces, and I don't want anything ending up on the floor." The children settled into their seats with the usual scraping of chairs and shuffling of supplies. Everyone except Mara, who remained standing, staring down at the materials on her desk, as if they were written in a foreign language. "Mara," Ms. Dalton said gently, approaching her desk, "this project really does require sitting. You'll need both hands free, and it's going to take about 30 minutes. Can you try?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She pulled out her chair with trembling hands and positioned herself over it. The other children had already started cutting and gluing, chattering about their designs. Nobody was paying attention to Mara as she began the agonizing process of lowering herself into the seat. She moved in slow motion, bending her knees fractionally, her whole body rigid with tension. When she was about halfway down, she paused, breathing hard through her nose. Then she continued, lower, lower, until finally her body made contact with the plastic chair. The transformation was instantaneous and terrible. Mara's entire body went rigid, every muscle locked in agony. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, her eyes squeezing shut as tears began streaming down her face. But worse than the tears was the shaking. It started in her shoulders and spread through her entire frame, violent tremors that made the desk rattle and sent her pencils rolling onto the floor. "Mara!" Ms. Dalton rushed to her side. But several other children had already noticed, and their reactions set off a chain reaction through the classroom. "What's wrong with her?" someone cried out. "Is she having a seizure? She's crying." "Everybody stay in your seats," Ms. Dalton commanded, trying to keep her voice steady even as her heart raced. She crouched beside Mara, careful not to touch her. "Honey, I need you to stand up. Can you do that for me? Just stand up." But Mara seemed frozen, locked in place by pain or fear, or both. The shaking intensified, and now she was making small, wounded sounds in the back of her throat that were somehow worse than screaming. "Sarah," Miss Dalton turned to her most responsible student, "go get Mrs. Hunt from the counseling office. Run. Tell her it's an emergency." As Sarah sprinted from the room, Miss Dalton turned back to Mara. "I'm going to help you stand up, okay? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. She gently grasped Mara's arm and helped lift her from the chair. The moment Mara was upright, she collapsed against Miss Dalton, sobbing into her teacher's shoulder with a desperation that broke something in the older woman's heart. Miss Dalton wrapped her arms around the shaking child, holding her carefully, avoiding her lower back. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're okay. I've got you." Mrs. Patricia Hunt, the school counselor, arrived within minutes, slightly breathless. She took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Mara sobbing in Miss Dalton's arms, the class of wide-eyed third graders watching in stunned silence, the tension thick in the air. "Let's get her somewhere quiet," Mrs. Hunt said softly. "Ms. Dalton, can you manage?" "Yes." "Class, Emma is in charge. Continue with your projects quietly. I'll be back soon." They walked Mara down the hallway to the counseling office, a small, warmly decorated room with comfortable chairs and shelves full of books and toys meant to put children at ease. Mrs. Hunt had a gift for creating safe spaces, and over the years, countless students had found comfort within these walls. But as they settled Mara into a beanbag chair where she could recline without putting pressure on her lower back, Mrs. Hunt wondered if this child's pain went deeper than anything she'd encountered before. Nurse Williams joined them, her face grave. The 3 women formed a gentle semicircle around Mara, who had curled into herself, still crying, still trembling. "Mara," Mrs. Hunt began, her voice soft and patient, "I know you're scared. I can see it. And I know something is hurting you badly. We're not going to force you to do anything, but we need you to understand something important. We're here to help you. That's our job. That's what we do. And sometimes Getting help means being brave enough to tell the truth about hard things. Mara's crying had subsided to hiccuping sobs. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving streaks across her cheeks. "Nobody's going to be angry with you," Miss Dalton added, kneeling beside the beanbag chair. "Whatever you tell us, we'll believe you, and we'll do everything in our power to keep you safe." "But what if—" Mara's voice was so small they had to lean in to hear her. "What if telling makes things worse?" "Worse for who, honey?" Nurse Williams asked gently. Mara's eyes darted between the three women, and in that moment, she looked simultaneously like a scared 8-year-old and someone much older, someone who had learned hard lessons about trust and consequences. "What if he hurts my brother?" The words came out in a rush, followed by a fresh wave of tears. "What if they take us away and split us up? What if Mom loses us? It's my fault. I should be able to handle it. I should be stronger." The three women exchanged glances that communicated volumes. He, brother, Mom. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it was uglier than any of them had wanted to imagine. "Mara," Mrs. Hunt said carefully, "is someone hurting you?" The girl's silence was answer enough. "Is that person hurting your brother too?" Mara shook her head violently. "No, not anymore, because I don't let him. I step in front. That's what big sisters do, right? They protect their little brothers, especially when they're only 5 and they don't understand why someone would want to hurt them." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Miss Dalton felt tears pricking her own eyes. Nurse Williams had gone very still, her professional composure the only thing keeping her expression neutral. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Hunt breathed, "that's very brave, but you shouldn't have to protect anyone. You're a child. You should be protected." "But there's nobody else," Mara said, and the resignation in her voice was heartbreaking. "Mom works all the time, and when she's home, she's tired, and he's nice to her. He brings her flowers. He makes her laugh. She thinks he's good. She doesn't see." "Doesn't see what?" Miss Dalton asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "Doesn't see what he does when she's not looking. Doesn't see him take his belt off. Doesn't hear him say Tommy was bad, that he needs to learn respect, that he's going to beat it into him if necessary." Mara's voice had gone flat, reciting facts. "But I can stop it. If I tell Mom that I'm the one who broke the glass, or I'm the one who tracked mud in the house, or I'm the one who talked back, then he takes the belt to me instead." "How long has this been happening?" Nurse Williams asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the horror of what she was hearing. "Since he moved in, 6 months maybe. I don't remember exactly. It was spring, I think. Everything had flowers. 6 months. Half a year of this child deliberately taking beatings meant for her younger brother. 6 months of pain, of fear, of learning to stand because sitting hurt too much. 6 months of an 8-year-old shouldering a burden that would break most adults. "Mara," Mrs. Hunt said firmly, "what you've been doing is incredibly brave, but it has to stop now. What this man is doing to you is wrong. It's abuse. And your brother shouldn't be in that house either, if there's even a possibility he could be hurt." Panic flashed across Mara's face. No, you can't tell. You can't take us away. I can handle it. I've been handling it. Please. If you tell, Mom will hate me. She loves him. She thinks he's the best thing that ever happened to us. And Tommy, he's little. He doesn't understand. Foster care splits up siblings sometimes. I heard kids at my old school talking about it. I can't lose my brother. He's all I have." "Nobody wants to split you up," Ms. Dalton assured her, though she wasn't sure she could promise that. "But Mara, you can't keep living like this. You collapsed from exhaustion. You're in constant pain. This isn't sustainable, and it isn't right." "I need you to show us," Nurse Williams said quietly. "I need to see what he's done to you so I can document it. Because, Mara, If we're going to help you and your brother, if we're going to make sure you're both safe, we need evidence." "Will he go to jail?" Mara asked, her voice very small. "If what you're telling us is true, then yes, he should. Mom will be alone then. She'll be so sad." The fact that this child was worried about her mother's feelings after everything she'd been through was almost too much. Miss Dalton had to look away for a moment to compose herself. "Your mom is an adult," Mrs. Hunt said gently. "She can take care of herself. But you and Tommy are children, and you need adults to take care of you properly. That's not happening right now." Mara was quiet for a long time, her small face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Fear, guilt, hope, despair, all warring for dominance. Finally, she took a shaky breath. "If I show you," she whispered, "you have to promise something." "What's that, honey?" "Promise you'll keep Tommy safe. Promise they won't hurt him while you're getting me out. Promise he won't be alone with him, even for a minute." "I promise," Mrs. Hunt said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "We'll call the police right now if we need to. Your brother will be protected." Mara nodded slowly, then with trembling hands, she reached for the hem of her uniform shirt. The three women held their collective breath as she turned around and began to lift the fabric. What they saw made Nurse Williams gasp audibly, made Ms. Dalton cover her mouth in horror, and made Mrs. Hunt immediately reach for her phone. The child's lower back and upper thighs were covered in bruises in various stages of healing. Fresh purple and black marks overlapped with yellowing older ones, creating a grotesque map of repeated violence. But worse than the bruises were the welts, raised angry lines that crisscrossed her skin in a pattern that was unmistakably the mark of a belt. Some had scabbed over, others looked infected, angry red streaks radiating from the wounds. "Dear God," Ms. Dalton breathed. "Mara, how have you been living with this?" "You get used to it," Mara said quietly, lowering her shirt back down. "The first few days after are the worst. That's why I can't sit. But then it starts to heal a little, and right when it's almost better, something else happens and he does it again." Nurse Williams was already documenting everything with her camera, her hands shaking as she photographed the evidence. "When was the most recent incident?" "Friday night. Tommy spilled juice on the carpet. It was an accident. He's 5. 5-year-olds spill things. But he said Tommy needed to learn to be more careful, and he went to get the belt. So I said it was my fault. I said I'd bumped Tommy's arm and made him spill it. He believed me because I'm older and should know better." "How many times did he hit you?" Mrs. Hunt asked, her voice tight. "I don't know. I stopped counting after 10. I learned not to scream because it makes him angrier. If you stay quiet and take it, it ends faster." Ms. Dalton had to step out of the room. She made it to the hallway before the tears came, hot and furious. This child, this brave, selfless, remarkable child, had been teaching herself to endure torture in silence to protect her little brother, and they had almost missed it. If Mara had been just a little better at hiding the pain, if she'd managed to sit through class without incident, they might never have known. Inside the office, Mrs. Hunt was already on the phone with Child Protective Services. "Yes, I'm calling to report suspected child abuse, severe physical abuse. We have an 8-year-old girl with extensive bruising and belt marks, covering her lower back and thighs." "Yes, I'll hold." Nurse Williams was with Mara, gently applying antiseptic to the wounds that looked infected. "This is going to sting a little, honey, but we need to clean these. I should have done this days ago if I'd known." "You couldn't have known," Mara said. "I was trying really hard to hide it." "You did a remarkable job, too good of a job." Within the hour, the school was swarming with activity. 2 police officers arrived first, a male officer named Detective Martinez and a female officer named Sergeant Chen, who specialized in cases involving children. They were followed by a CPS caseworker named Amanda Brooks, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a briefcase full of forms and protocols. They set up in the conference room and, one by one, they interviewed everyone who had interacted with Mara. Ms. Dalton recounted every incident, every time Mara had refused to sit, every wince and tremor and moment of pain. Nurse Williams provided her medical documentation and photographs. Mrs. Hunt detailed the conversation in her office, Mara's revelations about protecting her brother. And then they spoke to Mara herself. Sergeant Chen conducted the interview with Amanda Brooks present, recording everything on video as the child haltingly told her story. She described her mother's boyfriend, a man named Derek Sloan, who had moved into their small apartment in April. She explained how he'd seemed nice at first, buying Tommy toys and helping with groceries. But then the rules started. Don't leave toys out. Don't make noise after 8 p.m. Don't talk back. Don't question. The first time he hit Tommy, it was because my brother was singing too loud during a TV show Derek wanted to watch, Mara explained, her voice eerily calm as she recounted the horror. He grabbed Tommy by the arm and hit him with his hand. Tommy cried for an hour. I told Mom, but she said Derek was just stressed from work and we needed to be more considerate. What did you do? Sergeant Chen asked gently. I started watching Tommy more carefully, making sure he followed all the rules. But there are so many rules and Tommy's little, he forgets. So when he would do something wrong, I'd try to take the blame. It worked most of the time. Did your mother ever see you being hit? Mara shook her head. He's smart about it. He only does it when she's at work. And I hide the marks. I started wearing long sleeves even in summer. I'd change in the bathroom at school so nobody would see during gym class. Until you couldn't hide the pain anymore, Amanda Brooks said softly. I thought I could. I really tried. But I guess standing for days makes you tired. Mara's voice cracked. Is Tommy okay? You promised he'd be okay. We're getting him right now, Detective Martinez assured her. We have officers going to his kindergarten to pick him up. He won't go back to that apartment until we know it's safe. It's not safe, Mara said flatly. As long as Derek is there, it's not safe. While they interviewed Mara, other officers were executing their own part of the operation. 2 units were dispatched to Jefferson Elementary, where 5-year-old Tommy Jenkins was in afternoon kindergarten, likely singing or coloring, completely unaware that his world was about to change. 2 more units went to the apartment complex where the Jenkins family lived, preparing to confront Derek Sloan. At the diner where Diana Jenkins worked the lunch shift, yet another officer waited to break the news that her children were being removed from her home and her boyfriend was being arrested for felony child abuse. Back at Riverside Elementary, Ms. Dalton sat with Mara in Mrs. Hunt's office while the adults processed paperwork and made phone calls and set in motion the machinery of Child Protective Services. Mara was exhausted, the adrenaline of confession wearing off and leaving her hollow-eyed and fragile. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now the grown-ups handle things, Ms. Dalton said, holding her hand. You don't have to be the protector anymore. You don't have to be the brave one who takes the punishment. You get to just be 8 years old. I don't remember how to do that. The words hung in the air, a devastating indictment of what this child had lost. Miss Dalton pulled her into a gentle hug, mindful of her injuries, and let her own tears fall freely this time. You'll remember, she promised. It might take time, but you'll remember how to feel safe, how to play, how to be a kid who doesn't have to count belt strikes or invent lies to protect her brother. Detective Martinez returned with good news. We have Tommy. He's safe. We picked him up from school and he's with a very nice officer who's getting him a snack. He's asking for you. Can I see him? Mara asked desperately. Please, I need to see him. Absolutely. Come with me. They found Tommy in another office, sitting at a table with a juice box and some cookies, swinging his legs and chatting happily with Officer Stevens about his favorite cartoon characters. The moment he saw his sister, his whole face lit up. "Mara!" He scrambled down from the chair and ran to her. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the pain, and wrapped her arms around him. "You're okay," she whispered into his hair. "You're safe. Everything's going to be okay now." "Why am I here?" Tommy asked, confused but not frightened. "The police lady said it was a special surprise." "It is," Mara said, glancing up at the officers with gratitude for their gentle handling of her brother. "We're going on a little adventure, together, you and me. Will Mommy come?" Mara hesitated, and Amanda Brooks knelt down beside them. "Your mom needs to take care of some grown-up things first, but you two are going to stay together. We're going to find you a nice place to stay for a little while, and you'll be together the whole time. Does that sound okay?" Tommy looked uncertain, but he trusted his sister completely. "Mara, it's okay, Tommy, I promise. We're going to be okay." And for the first time in months, she actually believed it might be true. By evening, Derek Sloan was in custody, arrested on multiple counts of felony child abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. Mara's testimony, the photographs, the medical documentation. When officers arrived at the apartment, they found the belt he'd used, still hanging on the back of his bedroom door. They found a closet with a lock on the outside, where Mara admitted she'd sometimes been shut for hours as additional punishment. Diana Jenkins was in shock, refusing at first to believe what she was being told. "Derek wouldn't do that," she kept insisting. "He loves the kids. He's good to them. Mara must be lying." But when they showed her the photographs, when they detailed the extent of the injuries, something in her broke. She collapsed in the police station, sobbing, torn between denial and the dawning horrible realization that she had failed to protect her children, that she had chosen a man over their safety, that her daughter had been suffering for months while she remained willfully blind. Mara and Tommy were placed in an emergency foster home that night, a couple named Robert and Sandra Chen, who had years of experience with traumatized children. Sandra had a gentle way about her that immediately put Tommy at ease, and Robert showed them to their rooms with quiet kindness. "You'll each have your own room," he explained, "but they're right next to each other, and the door can stay open if you want." "Can Tommy sleep in my room?" Mara asked. "Just for tonight. He has nightmares sometimes. Of course, we can set up a sleeping bag on your floor." That night, as Tommy slept curled up in the sleeping bag beside her bed, Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 6 months, she wasn't listening for the sound of Derek's footsteps in the hallway, wasn't calculating how many hours until her mother would be home, wasn't mentally preparing herself to step between him and Tommy if needed. She was just a child in a safe bed in a quiet house, and the relief of that was so profound she started crying again, quiet tears that soaked into her pillow. In the weeks that followed, the legal process unfolded. Derek Sloan was denied bail, deemed too dangerous to be released. Diana Jenkins was required to attend parenting classes and therapy as a condition of potentially regaining custody. She visited her children weekly, sessions supervised by a social worker, and slowly, painfully, began to understand the magnitude of what had happened under her roof. "I'm so sorry," she told Mara during one visit, her own eyes red from crying. "I should have seen. I should have protected you. I chose him over you, and that's unforgivable." "You didn't know," Mara said, but her voice was uncertain. Part of her wanted to forgive her mother. Part of her was still angry that she'd had to be the protector when she should have been protected. "I didn't want to know," Diana corrected. "There's a difference. I saw signs. I dismissed them. That's on me." The therapy helped. Both children attended weekly sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Tommy, young enough that the memories would eventually fade, was already bouncing back, his natural resilience aided by the safety of the Chen household. Mara's recovery was slower, more complicated. She had nightmares. She flinched at sudden movements, and it took weeks before she could sit comfortably without tensing up. But gradually, incrementally, she healed. Ms. Dalton visited often, bringing homework and words of encouragement. The Chens were endlessly patient, never pushing, always there with support when she needed it. And slowly, Mara began to remember what it felt like to just be a kid. 3 months after that terrible day in the counseling office, Mara walked into Ms. Dalton's classroom for the first time since everything had changed. The school had worked with CPS to ensure she could remain at Riverside Elementary, despite the change in her living situation. The other students had been told simply that Mara had been going through something difficult and to be kind and welcoming. She stood in the doorway for a moment, remembering all the days she'd stood beside her desk in pain, all the times she'd been too afraid to sit. Then she walked to her desk and, without hesitation, pulled out her chair and sat down. It didn't hurt. The bruises had faded. The welts had healed. She was still going to carry the emotional scars for a long time, maybe forever, but the physical pain was gone. Miss Dalton watched with tears in her eyes as Mara settled into her seat, pulled out her notebook, and looked up with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Welcome back, Mara," she said softly. "Thank you," Mara replied, and then, even softer, "It's good to be back." The class went smoothly that day. They worked on a writing assignment about courage, and Mara wrote about a girl who learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. She wrote about how being strong doesn't mean suffering alone, and how real heroes are the ones who show up when you need them most. When she turned it in, Ms. Dalton read it through twice, then pulled Mara aside after class. "This is beautiful and true. You know that you're the hero of this story too, right? What you did for your brother, the way you survived, the courage it took to finally tell the truth, that's heroic." Mara thought about it for a moment. "Maybe, but I think the real heroes were the people who believed me, who helped me, who didn't give up even when I was too scared to help myself." "Then maybe," Mr. Dalton suggested, "we were all heroes together." At home that evening, Mara helped Tommy with his kindergarten homework, sounding out words and praising his shaky handwriting. Sandra Chen made dinner while Robert supervised bath time. It was ordinary and domestic and safe, and Mara found herself actually looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. Before bed, Tommy climbed onto her bed for their nightly ritual of reading together. He picked a book about a brave knight, and as Mara read about dragons being defeated and kingdoms being saved, she realized something important. The monsters weren't always fire-breathing creatures in caves. Sometimes they were people who lived in your house and smiled at your mother, but they could still be defeated. Not by one small girl carrying all the weight alone, but by a community of people who cared enough to notice, to believe, to act. The story ended happily, as children's stories should. The knight saved the day, the kingdom celebrated, and everyone lived without fear. "Can we have that?" Tommy asked sleepily. "The living without fear part." Mara looked down at her brother, at his trusting eyes and his healing spirit, and felt something shift in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the tiniest bit of peace. "Yeah," she said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "I think we can." And sitting there, comfortable in a chair with her brother safe beside her, Mara Jenkins began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they really could. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how one person's attention and care can change a child's entire world, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What signs do you think adults should watch for in children who might be suffering in silence? Your insights could help someone recognize a child in need. And if you found value in this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more powerful true stories that shine a light on important issues. Share this with someone who works with children, who cares about child welfare, or who simply believes that every child deserves to feel safe. Together, we can create a world where no child has to choose between protecting their sibling and protecting themselves, where every Mara finds her Ms. Dalton, and where suffering never goes unnoticed. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest children are screaming the loudest for help.